This happened when I was 18. I'm 22 now. I live in San Antonio, Texas. It was my senior year of high school, but this was when COVID just started blowing up. So everything began to shut down, including my school. Even though everyone was supposed to be staying home and being in quarantine, my friend group and I were going out more than ever. There wasn't much to do since all the non-essential businesses were closed. But one thing about me, I love urban exploring or exploring haunted places. To this day, I still do. I'm not one to scare easily. I've had a couple of experiences with the homeless, cults, even had a gun pointed at me, but nothing compared to how odd and creepy this one instance I came across while exploring was. Moving forward around this time, I started talking to a girl who I had a class with in high school. Her name was Clarissa. If it weren't for her matching my alibi of what happened this night, I'm sure none of my friends would have believed me. We were still kind of freshly dating, but I somehow convinced her to explore a wooded natural park at 3 a.m. here in San Antonio. The park is called O.P. Schnabel. It's relatively nice, safe, and very scenic during the day. But at night it can be a dangerous place, and police usually roam the entrances to the area at night, keeping people away. In 2016, a 24-year-old woman named Lauren Bump was brutally murdered and stabbed over 20 times. And in 2021, a boy exploring the woods was shot. Clarissa and I get to the park around 3 a.m. It's super creepy and pitch black. The trees do a really good job at covering the moonlight. I don't like to have my flashlight on because then my eyes can't adjust to the darkness, and you can really only see what's lit up from the light. Plus, I wouldn't want someone to see my light from a far distance, so I like to keep them off while exploring. We were probably about 15 to 20 minutes in walking the main trail. I didn't plan to be in there for too long because it was kind of creepy and oddly quiet that night. I knew a trail that goes off the road that leads back to where my truck was parked. I told her we could take that trail, essentially making a full circle instead of walking all the way back around. She agreed, and so we began walking through that off-road trail. We were probably only about 2 minutes into the off-road trail when suddenly, out of nowhere, a flute began playing. Clarissa and I stopped dead in our tracks and looked at each other, just listening. Whoever was playing it, it was super in cadence and sounded like it was playing some sort of piece of music. However, there was no time for me to process that it may have sounded good. It was creepy as __. As I said before, I don't scare easily, but 15 seconds into the flute solo, Clarissa began trembling in fear and on the brink of crying. I was kind of just listening, but when Clarissa started praying to God to save her and forgive her for her sins, that's when I realized the severity of the situation. To be clear, it was super hard to pinpoint where the sound of the flute was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from the direction of the previous main trail, which was parallel to where we were, with about maybe 30 to 50 yards of woods in between. But it was getting louder and closer to the point where it sounded like the sound was right on top of us. Clarissa couldn't even focus because she was so scared, so I knew I had to man up and get us out of this situation. It's going to sound corny, but I told her, "Don't worry, I'm not going to let anything happen to you." I told her that we should run down the off-road trail to get away, so we did. We began to sprint. I believe the flute stopped playing, but it was hard to notice because I was more focused on getting the heck out of there. We only got about 30 feet when, out of nowhere, we heard the rustling of bushes and the snapping of leaves and twigs before something big dashed across the trail right in front of us. Now, this could have very well been a deer or some sort of bigger wildlife, but it was so strange because I could almost feel the size of whatever was in front of us. I don't know if it was from the wind or what. The only thing is, I never saw a silhouette or a shape of anything in front of us. Another strange thing is, I didn't hear it coming and I didn't hear it run away. I only heard the dash right when it was right in front of us. As soon as we felt and heard whatever dashed across the trail right in front of us, we obviously turned back around and bolted in the other direction until we got back to the original point where we heard the flute. And then, as if whoever was playing it was waiting for us to return, the flute started to play again, loud and right on top of us. This time it was almost chiming. It sounded like it belonged to some sort of Irish jig song or something, but the chiming was still in cadence. However, it was still impossible to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. It was just surrounding us. At this point, my fight-or-flight instincts kicked in because we were trapped. We had two options: either go back into the off-road trail where we heard that terrifying dash right in front of us, or go back to the main trail where the flute and whatever psychopath was playing it was. The off-road trail was definitely scarier because it was darker and surrounded by more dense forest, and at least the main trail was a cement path. Thus, I told Clarissa, who was still trembling in fear, let's start running down the main trail back to the truck. We ran back. Adrenaline was still pumping, so we cut the 20-minute walk into a 7 to 8-minute jog, and somewhere along the run, the flute noise must have stopped. Along the run back, there was a random porta-potty, and I was scared to death because what if someone was on the other side or hiding inside of it? Because it seemed to be somewhat parallel to where we were at earlier. Thankfully, I didn't see anyone or signs of anyone ever having been there. In fact, my truck was the only vehicle in the area near the main entrance to the woods. We made it to the truck, and I sped far away from there. The next day, I told all my friends about it, and I looked all over the internet to see if anyone's ever come across anything like this. People claim to run into ghosts, cults, animals making terrifying noises, but a soft and rhythmic flute solo? I couldn't find anything on that. Or maybe I just didn't look hard enough. I tried to figure out all the possibilities. There are some houses that eventually led into a neighborhood on the far edge of the woods, but those houses are at least a couple miles away, and we were fairly deep into the woods. So there's no way the sound could have traveled that far, because I'm telling you, the flute was clear as day, and it was 3 a.m. Obviously, I never found out who was playing that flute or what dashed right in front of us. I actually kind of got chills writing the story. The more I think about it, it actually seems more paranormal rather than something scary on a tangible level. I don't know if it was a person, ghost, cult, or what. I'm really hoping someone might have a rational explanation. Either way, I never really went back to those woods at night. I still explore plenty of creepy places, but never really came across anything like that ever again. I'm a 20-year-old guy. I work at a medium-sized hospital in Northwest Alabama as a pharmacy technician. I work an early night shift, 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. I'm also in charge of stocking the surgery rooms. I work for 7 days in a row, and then I have 7 days off. Working the 7 sucks, but the 7 off feels amazing. I work Thursday through Wednesday, and on my 6th night working, a Tuesday, I left a little early to go stay with my wife at her aunt's house about 30 minutes away from our house. She was babysitting her little cousins while her aunt and uncle were on a trip. The house didn't have any curtains, so she felt uneasy for the few nights she was there. I didn't go with her at first because it was during my work week, and she told me there was really no point if I was going to get there around 5 a.m. and then go to sleep once the sun started to rise. But on her last night babysitting, she felt extremely anxious, so I told her I was coming over. She is stubborn, but she thanked me and felt so much better once I arrived. Working the night shift for the last 2 years has really taken a toll on me mentally, and I think I've started to develop some slight insomnia. I literally could not go to sleep after getting to my wife's aunt's house. This isn't anything new, but I had never stayed up for more than about 28 hours before. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't sleep because we had a really big day. Ahead of us, we had to drop her little cousins off at school. Our friend was having a gender reveal party. We had to go shopping because we had no groceries at home since she had been away for the last 3 days, and I had to be at work at 6:00 p.m. I ended up falling asleep in the car for a little less than 10 minutes. I was really feeling that wave of sleepiness come over me, but I ended up getting a huge Red Bull and another energy drink once I got to work. I had my wife drive me to work and pick me up since my brakes needed to be changed, and I wasn't driving my car, and also because neither of us trusted myself to drive her car in over 24 hours of no sleep. It was Wednesday night now, and I'd been awake since about 2 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon. My shift started out fine. If I could stay busy, that tired feeling wouldn't really get to me. I put in my earbuds and was listening to music as I was stuck in the surgery rooms with their meds. It was a weeknight, so there were still some late surgeries finishing up, and housekeeping was cleaning up some operating rooms that had been used. It's not uncommon for surgery personnel to come into the room I was in and grab something that the room they were using may be out of, so I usually turn around and at least smile, and they smile back. I was in my own little world stocking the Omnicell machine with meds and listening to music when I heard the door behind me open. There was that distinct high-pitched squeal when a door needs its hinges to be oiled, made the loud crash that heavy wooden doors make when they shut. So I turned around to see who it was like always, except there was no one there. I didn't really get worried about it. Maybe they opened the door and saw I was in there and just decided to go to another room. So I continued on. As I pushed my cart to the next room, the light in this room was off. I opened the door, and I swear I saw someone hunched over by the Omnicell machine digging through the sharps bin. If you don't know what that is, it's a bin where you dispose of needles and vials after use instead of just putting them in a normal garbage can. Someone had already been caught doing this before in search of morphine and consequently was fired. I turned on the light. I was going to ask what they were doing, but when I turned the light on, there was no one there. Okay, now I was starting to get a little creeped out. I didn't know the time frame of when you could start hallucinating after not sleeping for over 24 hours, so I just told myself I was probably seeing things. I needed to just calm down. I finished up stocking surgery with no other occurrences and headed back to the pharmacy. At 2 a.m. every night, we have to deliver patient-specific medications to the nurses' station. I'm going to use the 5th floor as an example of how the floors are laid out, but each floor number corresponds with which floor they were on. There are 3 elevators in the middle of the floor. If you go left when getting off the elevator, there's the 5100 and 5200 side, and if you go to the right, there's the 5400 and 5500 side. There are 2 wings on each side. So there are patient rooms numbered 5105 to 5115, and the other wing has rooms 5201 to 5215. Each floor is laid out the exact same way, so each wing has 15 rooms on each side. To shorten the floor names, though, I'm going to refer to them as 51, 52, and 5455. Recently, the 5th floor, specifically the 5455 side, had been undergoing some remodeling, so our overflow floor, the 3rd floor, was where they put the patients who were on the 5455 side of the 5th floor while they remodeled. The 5455 side was empty because there weren't that many people in the hospital that night. I made my way up the hospital delivering meds to the nurses' station floor by floor until I got to the 5th floor. I went to the 5152 side, delivered the meds, and decided to go check out the progress of the 5455 side. As I went over there, I just got creeped out. There were no nurses, no patients, just the long, empty hallways. The surgery rooms are already empty and desolate most nights, so I'm used to walking around down there no problem, but seeing empty patient rooms just creeped me out. I walked slowly down the 55 side. I heard a noise that sounded like one of the hospital beds rattling. As I passed 5512, I quickly found out what the noise was. As I looked into the room, I saw an old man violently shaking as if he was having a seizure. Blood was running down his eyes, nose, and out of his mouth. He was making this gargling, groaning sound, almost like the sounds the zombies in The Walking Dead make. A monitor was frantically beeping like it does when a patient is coding. My heart dropped when I saw this, and I took a quick step behind the doorframe. I immediately stepped back into the room as I realized this man was in desperate need of medical attention. But when I looked back in there was no man. The bed was clean and made, the monitor was off, and there were no signs that anyone had even been in that room for at least a whole day. I thought at that point I was for sure hallucinating. I quickly made my way back over to the elevators, and I made my way back down to the 1st floor where the pharmacy is. As the elevator doors opened, an old man in a security shirt and hospital badge got on the elevator. He patted my shoulder as he walked past me. It was that same man I had seen moments before having a seizure and making those zombie-like noises. He smiled at me as the doors closed, and I watched the numbers on the elevator go all the way up to the 5th floor. I didn't push the button for the elevator to come back down, but the same elevator came back down to the 1st floor and opened. There was no one on the elevator. I ran back to the pharmacy and sat in a chair for the rest of my shift until my wife came and picked me up. As I was waiting, I Googled when hallucinations start when you haven't slept. It said between 30 and 48 hours, and I was on hour 38 of no sleep, so it made sense. The pharmacy's located directly under the 54-55 side, so when I walk in, I can see the window at the end of the hospital wing on the 24, 34, 44, and 54 side. Sometimes as I wait on the elevator on that side to go back down to the pharmacy, I look out the window. As I was walking out to my wife's car, I looked back up at the 5th floor window and saw the same old man looking at me through the window. I got chills as I got into my wife's car. I didn't say anything about what I saw that night. I'm not sure why I would have hallucinated that specific man, as I've never seen him before, and even if I have, he has no significance in my life whatsoever. I'm still not sure, though, if that was even a hallucination or if what I saw that night was real. It certainly felt real. I went to sleep immediately after getting home. I've not seen that man again, but I live with my boyfriend and his house that he owns. It's a modest house in a good neighborhood. Violent crime here is typically low. I say it's a modest house because compared to the other houses in the neighborhood, it's on the smaller side. But having a smaller house in this neighborhood is still very desirable because it allows us to still live in a nice town without owning a multi-million-dollar home. It's a single-floor, 3-bed and 2-bath house with a basement. We're on a very quiet block with a lot of privacy. The way the street curves provides this optimal privacy, as when we step outside of the house, there's not a single neighboring house directly facing us. There are 8 houses total on our block. Further down the block is a small wooded area. My boyfriend was away one weekend in Vegas for a bachelor party last October. I was alone from Thursday to Monday. Friday after work, I had some of my girls over for a wine night. At some point while we were in the living room watching scary movies, the doorbell rang. We all went quiet and looked at one another with the same faces. The doorbell ringing late at night while watching a scary movie almost felt not real. I went to go sneakily see if I could see who was outside on the porch, but I couldn't get a view from the window. There was a tiny glass panel at the top of the door, so I peeked through it. There were like 4 cars in the driveway. They had to know people were home, but I didn't see anyone on the porch. I went back to my friends, and while we all agreed that was weird, we accepted that it was just a very unfortunately timed ding-dong ditch. After everyone left, it was late enough for me to go to bed and fall asleep right away. But I was awoken that night not even an hour later to the doorbell ringing twice. I looked at my phone and it was like 1 in the morning. No one belongs outside your door at this hour. I immediately called my boyfriend and he picked up sounding really drunk in a loud bar. He had to go to a bathroom to be able to hear me. Once he heard me, he told me to just stay in the bedroom and not open the door to anyone. He never once suggested calling the police, so I refrained from doing that for now. We ended our call and I tried to just stay calm and go back to sleep. Just as my heart rate started to slow and I started to calm down, I heard something from outside. Some kind of clicking sounds until there was a knock at my window and the male's voice said, "Hey, anyone home? I need some help out here." I thanked the Lord the blinds were closed. I couldn't see who was out there and they couldn't see me. Instead of leaving, he knocked again on the window. He said, "I know you're home." This was what prompted me to call the police. I never heard the man outside walk away from the window. For all I knew, he was still standing outside of it. So I whispered the entire time while on the phone reporting someone trying to break into my house. Call me dramatic or an embellisher. But I was scared and I wanted the police here as soon as possible. Within 5 to 10 minutes, the doorbell rang again, followed by loud knocks. I went out and approached the front door and asked, "Who is it?" A male's voice said, "It's the police." It was a different voice from the other guy. I looked through the glass and confirmed it was a couple of police officers. I opened the door for them, and right off the bat, the taller officer in front walked right into my house without my even inviting him in. He said they were responding to my report of a disturbance, and I said, "There's a man lurking around the house, ringing the bell and knocking on my window." I don't want to make a big part of my recounting the story about this particular police officer, but he was the rudest man I'd ever met. I felt like he was on a power trip. He was demeaning towards me, telling me to shush and talking over me while I was trying to explain. He also didn't seem to take my claims very seriously. His partner didn't say a word, he just stood in the back. The taller one asked me details that I'd already made clear I wouldn't have, such as what the man looked like when I clearly stated that I hadn't seen him. And the officer actually said to me, "Well, you're the one who called us, ma'am. If you don't want our help, we can leave." I was taken aback completely. I'd never called the police before, and I never expected such a lack of professionalism. I apologized and said, "I'm just scared." It was around this time that the two officers walked around the house with their flashlights. They went full circle and then came back, but honestly, they didn't really check very thoroughly. I watched them through the windows. They came back to the door and told me there's nothing they can do if I don't have any cameras or proof of the man trying to commit any wrongdoing. The two cops then left. I didn't feel any better at all, besides the fact that maybe whoever that man was saw I called the police. I went back to bed, and thankfully, the next time I woke up was to sunlight creeping in through the closed blinds. It was around 10 in the morning. It was Saturday, and that night my friend was having a Halloween party that I was going to help set up for. During the day, I did a little grocery shopping, and while I was at it, picked up some things for the party. My costume was Velma from Scooby-Doo, and my friend throwing the party was Daphne. I got to her house around 6 in the evening. The party started at 9, and it really picked up around 10:30. I was there pretty late, like I probably left her house a little after 1 in the morning. I was good to drive as I didn't really drink much besides a few beers. When I got home, I immediately noticed a cool draft in the house. After setting my things down on the dining room table, I noticed the window open. I went to shut it, trying to remember why I would have opened it. I went to brush my teeth, but then when I came out from the bathroom, I noticed the basement door was wide open. I froze. This was when I started hearing this faint but consistent clicking sound. As I got closer to the basement stairs, I realized it was coming from down there. And then I got to the top of the stairs and I looked down to the pitch-black basement, and the clicking suddenly stopped. A voice from below suddenly said, "You're finally home." With that, I slammed the basement door shut and took my phone with me outside. I banged on the neighbor's door until he answered, and I chose to call the police in the safety of my neighbor's house. It was unfortunately the same two officers who returned to my house. My neighbor accompanied me as I went to speak with them this time, and I think that may have had some kind of impact on that taller cop's attitude. He wasn't as rude this time. He and his partner checked the house while my neighbor and I stood in the living room. Eventually, after their initial search, I showed them some of the spots I'd imagined someone could be hiding. I basically tore the entire house upside down while also on the phone with my drunk boyfriend. When I was sure that no one was here anymore, I packed a bag to go stay with my sister until Em came back. This time, I locked every window before leaving. The main takeaway lesson from my story is if you have windows that open wide enough for someone to crawl through, make sure they're always locked when they're closed. We still live in this house today, but for a few months, I refuse to be alone in the house for extended periods. I still have PTSD from this, and sometimes I have nightmares in which I think I'm hearing knocks at the window, and then I wake up.
I've always been drawn to the stillness of late-night walks. There's a haunting calm that makes everything feel otherworldly. I'm a welder by trade, been doing it for over 40 years now. I live alone on a sprawling, isolated farm, just me and my dog Bosley. The house is too large for one person, but I never had the heart to downsize after my wife Maria passed away. My kids moved out years ago, and ever since cancer took her, it's just been me and Bosley. One night, after a long day in the shop, I decided to go for a walk. My property is pretty big, so just a single loop is usually enough to satisfy my craving. The air was cool and Bosley trotted along beside me. Sometimes I think he likes me more than I like him. I've walked that loop hundreds of times, but as I was heading back toward the house, something caught my eye. I glanced up at the second-story window, the one that looks out from the bedroom Maria and I used to share. For a split second I thought I saw something move. I stopped dead in my tracks, staring up at that window. There was no reason anyone should be in there. I hadn't been in that room in years, couldn't bring myself to. I felt my blood start to boil at the thought of some stranger breaking into my house. I wasn't going to stand for that. I rushed inside, my heart pounding, and ran upstairs. The room was empty, just like I'd left it. No sign of anything out of place. I looked everywhere imaginable but found nothing. Yes, I was pretty freaked out, but I was more angry than anything. I didn't take this kind of thing lightly. I figured I had just seen something that wasn't there. I stood there for a while feeling foolish, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there. The next night, I was jolted awake by Bosley's menacing growl. He's a vigilant dog, never makes a sound unless there's a reason. I sat up in my bed, straining to hear through the oppressive silence. That's when I heard it, a slow, deliberate creaking from upstairs. It could have been the old house settling, but my mind conjured the image of footsteps, echoing from directly above. You can probably guess which room lies directly above mine. I considered fetching my hunting rifle from downstairs, but hesitated, not wanting to escalate things. If it came to it, I was confident I could handle whatever was up there with my bare hands. I grabbed my flashlight and ventured into the darkness. Once again, nothing. The room was eerily untouched, as if frozen in time. My anger was morphing into a gnawing anxiety. Something felt profoundly wrong in the house. The following night, I descended the stairs to find the kitchen lights blazing. I was certain I had turned them off before bed. I never leave lights on. There was no doubt anymore. Someone, or something, was in my house. Panic set in. I called the police, my voice trembling as I explained that I believed an intruder was lurking. They arrived, combing through the house from top to bottom, but found nothing. They were polite, told me to call again if needed, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. The next night was a descent into terror. Sleep eluded me, so I ventured upstairs, drawn to the bedroom by an inexplicable force. Perhaps I hoped confronting the room would quell my growing dread, but as I opened the door, a chill ran down my spine, paralyzing me. The floor was littered with Maria's clothes, as if disturbed by unseen hands. I had sealed them away after her death, yet now they lay scattered, mocking my efforts. This was no random occurrence, it was a sinister message. And then I saw her. A woman stood in the doorway, her gaze piercing through the darkness. Her face was obscured, but I knew she wasn't Maria. She was too short, too otherworldly. Whoever she was, she didn't belong in this realm. Fear gripped me like never before. Instinctively I charged at her. She fled down the stairs, vanishing into the night. By the time I reached outside, she had dissolved into the shadows. Bosley and I scoured the property, but she left no trace. That night, sleep was a distant memory. For months, insomnia became my constant companion. Every creak and whisper in the night set my nerves on edge. Each sound was a harbinger of dread. I slept with my rifle by my side, fearing the night I'd need it. Every noise was a potential threat. I considered calling my brother for help, but pride held me back. I was raised to face my demons alone. Yet, the nightmare persisted. One night, I saw her again, a spectral figure in the yard staring through the window. My heart nearly stopped. I grabbed my rifle and dashed outside, Bosley at my heels. She stood there, a haunting silhouette in the moonlight. I fired warning shots, hoping to banish her. She fled into the darkness, but my fear remained. I was haunted by this spectral woman, likely a tormented soul. I couldn't fathom why this was happening to me. I stood vigil, waiting for her return. She never did. I haven't seen her since, but I know she'll be back. I'm ready to defend myself, but living in constant fear is unbearable. Thank God for Bosley. I don't know what I'd do without him. I'll send an update if anything happens. I work for a catering service, which means I'm on the road a lot, usually late at night. I spend most of my time lugging stuff from place to place in this massive truck the company makes me drive. It's not the worst job in the world, but the hours are grueling, and it's not at all what I thought I'd be doing with my life. By the time I get home, I'm either so wired from caffeine that I can't sleep, or I pass out the second I hit the bed and stay that way for 12 hours. I was driving back home one night at like 2 in the morning. It was nice to be driving my own car again. As I was approaching my house, I realized I had probably had one too many Red Bulls, and there was no way I'd be able to sleep. On top of that, I hadn't eaten in hours, and I was starving. There's a McDonald's right off the highway about 10 minutes from my house. It's usually my first choice when it comes to late-night snacks, since it's just so convenient. I'm not even one to gorge myself on fast food, but that night something felt off. I just occasionally get this weird craving that only a handful of fries can satisfy. It's obviously 24/7, and I figured some comfort food would be the perfect thing to help me wind down. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was definitely after 2 by the time I pulled into the drive-thru. There were a few cars ahead of me, which I was actually kind of surprised by. It's not like this McDonald's was a busy spot at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. As I was sitting there impatiently, I found myself staring off into space, wondering what was taking so long. That's when I noticed something strange. There was an old beat-up Volkswagen with its windows tinted, backed into a spot in the very corner of the lot. The McDonald's itself was only accepting drive-thru orders at this hour, so it didn't make sense why there'd be a car in the lot. There were reserved spots on the other side for employees, so it couldn't have been one of them. I figured it was maybe just someone eating in their car, which it probably was. I myself did that from time to time, so I guess I couldn't judge. It was just an odd sight, to be completely honest. I got my food and started driving away. I didn't want to go home just yet, but I also didn't want to just sit there idling my car. I began racking my brain, trying to think of a good place to scarf down the food. I live in a pretty lush area, so there's honestly a lot of options. But I didn't want to beat around the bush too much, considering how late it was. There's a massive nature preserve literally down the street from my house. It's situated on a mountain and is essentially just an enormous forest. The kicker is that there's a scenic lookout point at the peak with a view of the city. There's a road that loops around the perimeter of the preserve and will take you right to the peak, which is nice during the day. After the preserve closes though, the road is inaccessible to cars but still a convenient path to get to the peak without having to walk through any woods. I used to go there with my friends from high school all the time. It was kind of a default spot when we wanted to be outside. We'd hang out, talk, smoke, or just appreciate the view. I actually hadn't been there in a while because I was just so busy working all the time, so I figured going there would deliver a much-needed nostalgia rush. When I got to the preserve parking area, it was completely empty. I say parking area because it wasn't a traditional parking lot with spaces for cars, but rather a big patch of gravel that veered off from one of the roads that ran past the preserve's border. Like I said, the actual preserve was closed, meaning I'd have to walk all the way up to the lookout spot from outside. Before I could even turn off the engine, I saw headlights pulling into the lot. That was unsettling enough on its own. Who else would be here at 2 a.m.? And then I realized what I was looking at. It was that same Volkswagen from the McDonald's parking lot. I was 100% certain of it. I parked a little ways away and the engine cut off. I felt the unease start to pour in. What were the odds of that happening naturally? Had they followed me? My window was partially rolled down and as far as I could tell there was no music coming from that car. Or at least none that I could hear. After nothing happened for a good minute or so, my fear started to fade. They were probably doing the same thing I was, out for some fresh air or a smoke. It's a pretty popular spot for that kind of thing, but it was just so weird, considering how late it was. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, even though I concluded that it was just one of those unexplainable coincidences. I sat there for a minute, debating if I should just go home. I didn't want to leave, but I didn't want to be alone either. I picked up my phone and FaceTimed one of my close friends who lived a few minutes away. I told myself that if he didn't pick up, I'd just eat my food in the car and drive home. He was actually awake, though, which I was a little surprised by. He said he had been up writing a paper. I convinced him to swing by and hang out for a bit. He was down. He said he'd be there in 10. While I waited, I kept my eyes on the Volkswagen. It still hadn't moved. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. When Sebastian finally pulled into the lot, I felt a lot better. We both got out of our cars and began walking up the path. Before the parking lot fully receded from view, I shot a glance backward. The Volkswagen was still there, but I saw all 4 doors open at once. 4 guys stepped out. They just stood there for a few seconds looking at each other. They weren't even talking, just looking around at each other. It was freaky. I nudged Sebastian, who realized what I was looking at. Before they could see us, we continued walking up the path so that the lot was obstructed from view. Alarm bells were going off in my head, but Sebastian didn't seem that concerned. He told me they were probably just going out to smoke. We kept walking, and by the time we got to the top, the city view was enough to take my mind off things. We always sat on this little rock wall that was supposed to keep people from wandering off the edge of the mountain. We sat there eating and talking like we used to. It was nice. Of course, that nice feeling didn't last very long. We heard the sound of talking and laughter quickly approaching us. We turned around to see 3 guys walking towards us, sharing what looked like a blunt. They were acting friendly enough, which definitely calmed my nerves a little. Instead of finding their own spot, though, they walked right up to us like they wanted to start a conversation. The guy with the blunt was covered in tattoos and had a nose ring. He honestly looked pretty intimidating. He flashed half a smile before asking us if we wanted to smoke. We both said no, and one of the other guys laughed and called us wimps, to which Sebastian scoffed. My curiosity got the better of me, and I blurted out a question about what they were doing at McDonald's. The guy holding the blunt dropped his smile instantly and narrowed his eyes, like he was caught off guard by my question. His 2 friends did the same, staring at us with cold expressions. They didn't say anything for an uncomfortably long time. That's when I remembered that there had been 4 guys in that car, not 3. One of them was missing. At that point, I was fully prepared to run. I knew Sebastian was thinking the same thing. Finally, the ringleader told us that he worked nights, and that he had just gotten off. He pulled his hoodie up to reveal a McDonald's uniform. I think because he knew we wouldn't have believed him otherwise. He then went on to say he came to the spot every day after work to smoke with his friends. While that definitely calmed me down a bit, something about this situation was terribly off. I could tell Sebastian felt the same. We decided it was time to go. As we started walking down the... Sebastian stopped and pointed into the trees. I followed his gaze and saw the 4th guy half hidden in the darkness. He was holding something, but I couldn't make out what it was. I felt my heart start racing. The moment he saw us looking, he started moving. That's when we ran. We bolted down the path, glancing back to see him chasing us with the 3 other guys close behind. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I could hear their footsteps getting closer, but I didn't look back again. We finally made it to the parking lot, jumped into our cars and floored out of there. As I was speeding away, I could see those guys rushing to get in their car. I didn't feel comfortable driving home out of fear that I'd be leading them right to my house. I called Sebastian and told him we should meet back up on his street. We had a decent head start on them and I don't think we were followed, but I wasn't taking any chances. When Sebastian and I met back up, we were still in shock about what the hell just happened. I don't know if they were trying to rob us or worse. I didn't know what to think. Sebastian showed me his phone and said he had snuck a picture of them while they weren't looking. He sent it to me, but I wasn't sure what to even do with it. I had off the next day, so I convinced Sebastian to come with me back to the McDonald's so we could at least report the employee. The next day, we approached a guy on the younger side in hopes that he'd listen to us. We showed him the picture and told him what happened, and his eyes widened. He told us something literally out of a horror movie. Apparently that guy's girlfriend had also worked at that same McDonald's and had dumped him a few months ago. He didn't take it well and would harass her while she was working and stalk her after her shifts. He obviously got fired, but that didn't help. The police were involved shortly after and there was a restraining order put in place. Apparently he had been violating that restraining order because he was camping out in the parking lot. Sebastian and I were horrified. I have no idea why he decided to follow me, but it was clear that he was unhinged. I'm praying that the police catch him camping out in the parking lot because then he'll actually be screwed. I just hope he doesn't recognize my car anywhere. It's only been a week, but I haven't been back to that McDonald's or the preserve since. Hopefully, the police are able to do something, but that's out of my control. Forgive me if I don't remember every detail of the story. It happened a while ago. I grew up in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. Not much goes on around here, so finding things to do can be a challenge. In high school, a few friends and I would sneak into and explore old abandoned buildings. That's the sort of thing we did at that age. I didn't realize how popular that kind of stuff is until many years later. Apparently lots of people like to explore abandoned buildings. Anyway, there was this abandoned church that we'd been to a couple of times before. It was in Narberth. I actually remember the exact address, 198 Elmwood Avenue. The place was creepy, but it was kind of our go-to spot for late-night thrills. One fall evening, a few of us decided to hit the church and drink a little inside. It was a chilly night and the air had that crisp bite to it. There were 6 of us: me, Luna, Gina, Johnny, Max, and Allie. The church sat behind an 8-foot chain-link fence which we had to climb to get in. The doors were all boarded up, so we always went through a window on the side. Once you were inside, the first thing you noticed was the floor, or lack of one. The entire first floor was just dirt. It looked like someone had ripped out the floorboards years ago, leaving only a hole in the center where a set of concrete stairs led down to the basement. That's where we always ended up, down in the basement. The basement had 3 rooms, but only one had a door. The other 2 just had door frames. The first room we went into was large. There wasn't much in it, just some old furniture, broken chairs, a busted couch. I remember having to shush Johnny like 12 times because he was a lightweight, and the tiny bit of alcohol he had was making him really loud and antsy. Being in such a big group was always a plus though, and I felt much safer knowing we had numbers. We messed around for a while, drinking and laughing like we usually did. We might have had a speaker playing music, but I don't fully remember. Out of nowhere, a door slammed. I literally jumped, that's how loud it was. We froze, staring at each other with concerned expressions. At first, I thought one of us had closed the door by accident, but no one was near it. Almost immediately, Luna, Gina, and Johnny made a break for it, sprinting up the stairs, leaving me, Max, and Allie behind. We were the fearless ones, and none of us wanted to leave just yet. My heart was definitely pounding, I fully admit that, but I wasn't going to let the wind freak me out. I could tell Max and Allie were thinking the same thing. I don't know if it was curiosity or stupidity, but we decided to investigate. After standing in silence for a few minutes, the 3 of us crept over to open the door that had slammed shut. Behind it was a small room, and the first thing I saw was a dresser. The mirror on top of it was cracked, and there were red stains smeared across the surface. At first I thought it was old paint or something, but when I got closer I realized something terrifying. It wasn't completely dry. The stains still had that sticky sheen to them, like whatever it was hadn't been there for long. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, and I was having second thoughts about not leaving sooner. Someone, or dare I say something, had recently been in this room. Then I saw the picture. There was an old photo on top of the dresser, a black and white shot of a woman in a wedding dress. She was smiling, but there was something off about it. The whole thing gave me a bad feeling. I backed away, but just as I turned, we heard another noise. This time it wasn't the door. It was coming from one of the other rooms. It was coming from the room we had just been in. That's when Max and Allie both decided they'd had enough. I wasn't going to argue with them. We grabbed our stuff and ran out of there as fast as we could. When we climbed back over the fence and hit the pavement, none of us said a word. After jumping the fence, I turned around, and I could swear I saw the silhouette of a person standing in the open window. I still pray that by some minuscule chance my mind was just playing tricks on me, but I'll never know for sure. My friends and I never went back there together for as long as we remained friends. I've actually been back to that church myself, although it wasn't a church anymore by the time I got around to checking it out again. It was completely demolished. I still have no idea what we saw that night. I'm just glad my friends were there to witness it with me. Had I been alone, I might doubt this whole thing even happened. If anyone wants to do some digging, go ahead. I was never able to find out anything online, but I wouldn't be surprised if that church has a history I don't know about.